Hello students, and welcome to the video lecture on Chapter 4, Federalism. So this is case law, but it's very important that you understand the federal nature of our government because the court system in this country works on a federal system as well. We have national courts, we have state courts, we have local courts. So it's very important to understand why we have a federal system and what that federal system is. So first of all, the definition of federalism is a system of government in which a written constitution divides the powers of government on a territorial basis. As I've said in times past, this is why when you need a stop sign put at the end of your street, you do not have to call Washington, D.C. You call your local council or trustees or whatever the commissioners or whatever the case may be, and they can take care of it on a local level. That's why federalism works. So why did the framers choose federalism? Well, number one, they realized that government poses a threat to individual liberty. And to lessen that threat or lessen the likelihood that a disaster would come from that threat, they divided government. One way they divided it is on a federal basis. There's a national government, there are state governments, there are county and township and local governments. So government being divided such as it is and not in one central spot made it less likely that they would become corrupt and tyrannical. Number two goes along with the explanation for number one. They realized that government must be restrained, and one way to restrain it is to divide it geographically. So these are three reasons why the framers chose federalism. So what powers do the federal government have? Well, we're going to put them in categories. Number one is the delegated powers. Those are powers given to the national government by the Constitution. The Constitution specifically lists certain powers that the government has. For example, Article 1, Section 8 lists all the powers of Congress. There are similar sections for the executive branch and for the courts. So delegated powers are given to the national government. The way I just described are the express powers, those that are written specifically. Implied are those that are not spelled out, necessarily listed in the Constitution, but are reasonably suggested by the powers that are listed. The government also has inherent powers, powers that all national governments have just by being a national government. One example of an inherent power is the power to regulate who comes into the country. Another example of an inherent power is the power to defend themselves from foreign enemies. Those inherently belong to national governments. Now, power is also denied to the national government in three specific ways. It's either specifically written in the Constitution, silence, or the Constitution says nothing about it, or the fact that we have a federal system itself and some powers naturally will go to state and local governments. The states have certain types of powers as well that we'll put into categories. One is reserved powers. Powers not given to the national government nor denied to the states go to the states. This is actually listed in the Bill of Rights. Those powers that are not mentioned, automatically it is assumed belong to the states. There are also concurrent powers, powers held by the national government and the states. Some things are controlled by the national government and the states. One example would be schooling. States have the primary responsibility for schooling, but over the years, the federal government has assumed the power of setting certain standards that students must meet. So that would be an example of a concurrent power. We have in Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause. This says that the national government, the U.S. Constitution, takes precedence over all state and local laws, and everything must fit under the umbrella of the Constitution or it is null and void. Now, the first important court case we're going to talk about, and again, this is case law, is McCulloch versus Maryland, which occurred way back in 1819. This basically confirmed that the Supreme Court is the umpire of the federal system. It set a precedent, and remember, a precedent is an example or standard, that the Supreme Court could judge whether or not certain laws were constitutional and whether or not the federal government and state government were abiding by the rules. Again, made them the umpire of the federal system. We'll talk more about McCulloch versus Maryland as we move through the course. Now, the national government in the 50 states, the national government has some obligations toward the states. For example, they are obligated to provide a republican form of government. That's one in which the states are all represented in the national government. Number two is to protect us from invasion and internal disorder. This is an inherent power, as we mentioned earlier. And number three is respect for territorial integrity. The national government cannot legally take away or expand the borders of any of the states. They must recognize the sovereignty of the states on that issue. Thank you for watching part 1. Have a great day.